Gopijanabhalabham Girivaradari Jaya Gopijanabhalabham Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunati Jayo Gopijanabhalabham Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai, Shri Shri Pralakshmi Singri Bhagwan Ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So English is good, huh? Translation into German. So Bhakta Björn übersetzt ins Deutsche. Wer kein Englisch versteht, kann sich zu Bhakta Björn dahinsetzen. Das ist ein sehr guter Übersetzer. So you're reading from the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 27, Understanding Material Nature, text 21. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Animita Nimitena Swadharmenat Malatmanam Swadharmena Malatmanam Tivrayamayi Bhaktyacham Tivrayamayi Bhaktacham Shruta Sambritaya Chiram. Shri Bhagavan Vacham Animita Nimitena Swadharmena Malatmana Tivrayamayi Bhaktyacham Shruta Sambritaya Chiram. Shri Bhagavan Vacham Animita Nimitena Swadharmena Malatmana Tivrayamayi Bhaktyacham Shruta Sambritaya Chiram. Swadharmena malatmana Tivraya mai bhaktyacha Yuddha Sambritaya Chiram. Matajis. Somebody else? Word by word translation. Shri Bhagavan Vacha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Animita animitena, without desiring the fruits of activities. Swadharmena, by executing one's prescribed duties. Amala atmana, with a pure mind. Tivraya, serious. Mai, unto me. Bhaktya, by devotional service. Cha, and. Shruta, hearing. Sambritaya, endowed with. Chiram, for a long time. Translation on purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. Once again, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. Purport. Sridhar Swami comments in this connection that by association with material nature alone, one does not become conditioned. Conditional life begins only after one is infected by the modes of material nature. If someone is in contact with the police department, that does not mean that he is a criminal. As long as one does not commit criminal acts, even though there is a police department, he is not punished. Similarly, the liberated soul is not affected, although he is in a material nature. Even the Supreme Personality of Godhead is supposed to be in association with material nature when he comes with the sense, but he is not affected. One has to act in such a way that in spite of being in the material nature, he is not affected by contamination. Although the lotus flower is in association with water, it does not mix with the water. That is how one has to live, as described here by the Personality of Godhead Kapila Deva. Animita nimite na swadharme nadmalatmana. One can be liberated from all the adverse circumstances simply by seriously engaging in devotional service. How this devotional service develops and becomes mature is explained here. In the beginning, one has to perform his prescribed duties with a clean mind. Clean consciousness means Krishna consciousness. One has to perform his prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. There is no necessity of changing one's prescribed duties. One simply has to act in Krishna consciousness. In discharging Krishna conscious duties, one should determine whether by his professional or occupational duties, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is satisfied. In another place in the Bhagavatam, it is said, Svanushthitasya dharmasya samsiddhir haritoshanam. Everyone has some prescribed duties to perform, but the perfection of such duties will be reached only if the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is satisfied by such actions. For example, Arjuna's prescribed duty was to fight, and the perfection of his fighting was tested by the satisfaction of Krishna. Krishna wanted him to fight, and when he fought for the satisfaction of the Lord, that was the perfection of his professional devotional duty. On the other hand, when contrary to the wish of Krishna, he was not willing to fight, that was imperfect. If one wants to perfect his life, he should discharge his prescribed duties for the satisfaction of Krishna. One must act in Krishna consciousness, for such action will never produce any reaction. Animita nimitena. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Janyatar kramanyonyatra. All activities should be performed simply for yajna or for the satisfaction of Vishnu. Anything done otherwise without the satisfaction of Vishnu or yajna produces bondage. So here it is also prescribed by Kapila Muni that one can transcend material entanglement by acting in Krishna consciousness, which means seriously engaging in devotional service. This serious devotional service can develop by hearing for long periods of time. Chanting and hearing is the beginning of the process of devotional service. One should associate with devotees and hear from them about the Lord's transcendental appearance, activities, disappearance, instructions, etc. There are two kinds of shruti or scripture. One is spoken by the Lord and the other is spoken about the Lord and his devotees. Bhagavad Gita is the former and Srimad Bhagavatam is the latter. One must hear these scriptures repeatedly from reliable sources in order to become fixed in serious devotional service. Through engagement in such devotional service, one becomes freed from the contamination of Maya. It is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead cleanses the heart of all contamination caused by the influence of the three modes of material nature. By continuous, regular hearing, the effects of the contamination of lust and greed to enjoy or lord it over material nature diminishes. And when lust and greed diminish, one then becomes situated in the mode of goodness. This is the stage of Brahman realization or spiritual realization. In this way, one becomes fixed on the transcendental platform. Remaining fixed on the transcendental platform is liberation from material entanglement. Om Ajnana Timidandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Litam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopipakanta Radhakanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Jayatam Surato Pangor Mamamanda Matirgati Matsarvasva Padam Vajo Radhamadana Mohano Divyat Vrindaranya Kalpadrumada Srimad Ratangara Simhasanasto Srimad Radha Srila Govinda Deva Uprishtalivi Savimano Smarami Srimandra Sarasaram Vamsiva Tatatastitaha Karsham Veno Swanair Gopir Gopinata Shri Estunaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Garadharan Srivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Once again the verse. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Animita Nimitena Swadharmena Malatmanam Tivraya Mai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Samvritaya Chiram. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. So here Kapila Muni is speaking, and one of the first parts, interesting parts, is that Srila Prabhupada in the purport is saying there are two kinds of Shruti or scripture. One is spoken by the Lord and the other one is about the Lord, spoken about the Lord by his devotees. So Shruti, generally there's Smriti and Shruti are the two most common types of scripture. Generally Smriti means what's remembered, and Smriti are all the different Puranas, for example, all the different stories. It's all Smriti, something that's been remembered. Somebody's remembering something and it's been told to somebody. And Shruti is considered to be, you could say, more reliable or more important. Some sections of the Vedic, you could say, of the Sanatan Dharma, people who follow Sanatan Dharma, they consider only Shruti to be real and Vedic. Only Shruti is real. Smriti, who knows? Maybe they don't remember properly. Somebody's remembering something. So Shruti is considered to be more reliable, and generally Shruti means the 4 Vedas, generally speaking. But here something slightly different, Prabhupada is saying, is that there are two kinds of Shruti or scripture. One is spoken by the Lord and the other is spoken about the Lord and his devotees. So that's interesting because Srila Prabhupada very often talks about this, not very often, but regularly. He will mention this in the Bhagavatam also in different purports, that some people will classify the Srimad Bhagavatam to be some kind of smriti, some Purana, some stories, maybe not so reliable. But Srila Prabhupada very often points out that actually the Srimad Bhagavatam is actually the perfection of Shruti. Srimad Bhagavatam is actually considered to be not only Vedic, but the fruit in the tree of the Vedas. So we know that we have the 4 Vedas, the 4 general Vedas, and they are, you could say, very original, very ancient, different hymns and Upanishads, those 4 Vedas are very extensive as well. They're very extensive. All kind of different topics are discussed there. But generally, you could say the majority of people don't have such an access to the Vedas. Some people start, they're getting tired, like, oh, the Vedas. They're like, because the Vedas are very philosophical, there are very many hymns, very ritualistic, So there are some stories also there, but generally the Vedas are, more or less, you could say, were traditionally reserved for the Brahmanas. Singadi Bhagwan ki jai. So the Vedas were reserved for the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas were the one who used to study the Vedas, memorize the Vedas, So there are different Brahmanas have different names. They're Dvivedi, Trivedi, or Chaturvedi, depending of how expert or how much you memorize, So some Brahmanas are Chaturvedi, means all 4 Vedas, This Brahmana memorized. And then there's the family, Chaturveda family, And still in India you will find people, they have this family name, Dvivedi, Chaturvedi, Trivedi, And so the Vedas are generally, reserved for the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas, they studied and practiced, all the different aspects of Vedic culture. The majority of the population, they mainly were, you could say, entertained or connected to Vedic culture through itihasas and to the Puranas. So itihasas are the stories like the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and different Puranas. There is considered to be 18 Puranas. 18 Puranas, they are then divided into 3 sections. 6 Puranas for people in the mode of ignorance, 6 Puranas for people in the mode of passion, and 6 Puranas for people in the mode of goodness. So these Puranas, they would basically pick up people where their interests were invested. So some Puranas are in the mode of ignorance, so people who were in the mode of ignorance, they were attracted to those Puranas. And those Puranas were then gradually, you could say, elevate them, give them information, entertain them, but at the same time educate them. So the Puranas, they were written texts as well, of course, but the Puranas were very often also performed as theater and song. And this is a very powerful medium to educate people. India has thousands of different styles of, dances and traditional performances, and most of those, they revolve around the Puranas and the Itihasas. And this is very powerful. It's similar to television. The majority of the people, they just turn the television on, or nowadays, YouTube, and then you get your information there. Let's see what comes. So when you see something, as a drama, it has a very deep impact. It's very easy to memorize, and you were very invested or attracted, absorbed, and usually you don't fall asleep. Just chanting the mantras, And some places in India still it's visible and alive. In Varanasi, I think Melkote, there are a few places in India where the Brahmanas are still being trained to recite the Veda. And somebody was writing, like in some places in India, I think Varanasi especially, this system has been going on, for at least 4,000 years, uninterrupted. There's the students, the Gurukulis sitting, and the gurus chanting, Am Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashyanti Surayo Diviva. And I'm also not expert, but in the right intonation, the perfect pitch, they're chanting these mantras, since thousands of years. So when you hear this, it's like looking into the past, It's like, that's why India is special, because in India, in a few places, you can still observe and see practices and customs that have been alive for many, many thousands of years. Whereas in Europe, all the ancient civilizations, basically disappeared. The Romans and the Greeks, they're not worshipping anymore in their temples, in Rome or Athens. It's over. In India, still there's a few places where you can look very far into the past, this ancient Vedic past. So it takes a lot of discipline, a lot of, and it's interesting to, when you go to Varanasi, to observe all these gurukulis, who are being trained, these young boys, and you can see that they are very, they're very disciplined, they're very diligent, but you can also see sometimes they get very tired, But the Puranic stories are different. The Puranic stories, they're so entertaining. They're so much fun. If you hear the stories, you become, it's like a good night story. When a good night story is too good, then the children don't want to go to sleep. They want to hear more. And Srila Prabhupada also very often mentions how it used to be custom in Indian villages. And I'm sure in some places it's still there, that the senior members of the village, the grandparents, they would sit at night and in the bonfire and tell from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. This was the tradition. That every night, all the children would gather, and then the Opa was there, and he was telling stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata, and all the children were like, wow, hearing about all the heroes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And in Maharashtra, still also it's very common. There are these groups that travel the land, and they sing in Marathi. They sing, they just dance and sing different stories from the Puranas. So one time I saw one Marathi movie, and it was really interesting because the dancers in that movie, they were basically performing the entire 8th canto. There's all the stories from the 8th canto, where they're in this Marathi songs. The churning of the milk ocean, and all of these stories, they were kept alive or transmitted to the people in the form of stories. And I was in Gurukul. So in Gurukul, in the ISKCON Gurukul, we did not practice too much, learning the mantras, the Vedas actually. Mainly they were telling us the stories of the Bhagavatam. So even I read the Bhagavatam only when I was probably 18. I started reading Bhagavatam. I knew all the stories already. And it was nice to read it, because when I read it finally, then I got all the details. But just in the theaters that were in the temple, in the regular festivals, and the stories that we were hearing in the Gurukul, we knew all the stories of the Bhagavatam. They were all alive in our memory. And also Ramayana and Mahabharata. It's very cool. If children just love stories. And this is the first book I read was Mahabharata. I read the whole Mahabharata. And my mother found me one night. I was crying, because I read the story of Karna. Karna and Radeya. Such a dramatic story. So the Puranic stories, they are very engaging. They really catch the attention and the imagination. And many people, or you'd say anybody who has read the Mahabharata, even in the short version or maybe longer versions, it's a unique story. You cannot compare. There is no comparison. The Mahabharata is the greatest epic. And the main reason why it's such a unique epic, in my opinion, or what maybe makes sense, is because the heroes are not only warriors, but also there are many yogis, many sages. So it's a story where the sages and the yogis, have a great, you could say, role to play. The entire Varnashrama Dharma is displayed in the Mahabharata. You have the rishis and the great, teachers that instruct, and guide the kings and the different kings, performing their duties or neglecting their duties or overstepping their duties, overstepping their realm, etc. And there's love, there's war, there's action, there's wisdom, there's conquest, everything is there in the Mahabharata. Drama, Ramayana especially, is very dramatic, very dramatic. So all of those stories are that talk about different aspects of you could say the divinity. Some Puranas were focused more on Shiva, some focus more on Shakti, and then usually the more Sattvic Puranas focus more on Vishnu. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, among all these Puranas, focuses exclusively on Vishnu and pure devotional service. But before we get to the Bhagavatam, there's There's the Bhagavatam, and then there's all the different Puranas, and then there's also the different Upanishads. Some Upanishads are in the Vedic text, some Upanishads come afterwards, and all of this is summarized into the Vedanta Sutra. So the Vedanta Sutra tries to summarize all the Vedic knowledge from the different Upanishads and the Vedas themselves into one text. So the Vedanta Sutra, Veda Anta, also means, of course, the end of the Vedas or the conclusion of the Vedas. And the Vedantas are composed in sutras. So sutras are very short sentences, sometimes only 2 or 3 words, sometimes a little bit longer also, but generally a sutra is an aphorism or a very short sentence. Sometimes they're called wisdom nuggets, or pearls of wisdom, pearls of wisdom, very essential. And you could also say that a sutra is like a zip file, zip files. You have a big files, and then you can compress everything into one zip file. And then if you need to open it, you need to decompress it, and then it becomes big again. So that's a sutra. A sutra is compressed information in very few words. So all the Vedic knowledge is ultimately compressed into the Vedanta Sutras. And in a very similar way that the Puranas make the Vedic knowledge or Vedic culture accessible, this Vedanta Sutra is essential, but it's also very abstract. It's very abstract, so it's not so easy to comprehend. If you ever study the sutras, Yoga Sutras or Vedanta Sutras, if you are a layman, a beginner, you're not expert in Sanskrit, you read it and you have no idea, you don't understand. You cannot unzip the file, Nowadays it's very easy to unzip files, but before, I remember when the first zip files came, it was you need to really be an IT expert, to unzip, a zip file. It was not so easy. You need to have this extra program, and then you put the zip file, then you see, I know you remember Windows 98, and then the zip file was like, and then slowly one folder after the other was taking out of the zip file. So if you're not expert, it's difficult to, unzip, open the sutra and understand what's hidden there. It might also become very tiring. If you just read when I started teaching the Yoga Sutras, you just read the sutra and it's very, like something like, what is this famous sutra? I forgot the Sanskrit, but more or less in Yoga Sutra, there's one sutra that says, the observer, it's observing itself, but at the same time, it should realize that the observer is observing itself, but should realize that he's observing what's observable, something like this. So it's like, what? But if you have a little bit more knowledge, then if you read Bhagavad Gita, and you have some further information, you can understand that it's actually very deep topics, Or in the Bhagavad Gita also there is some verses that are, similar, where it says that the one who sees action and inaction and inaction and action truly sees, So things like that, they're very, very deep. There's so much, you can talk about one verse like this for a very, very long time because so much information is hidden in there. So the Vedanta Sutra is like that. It's the essence, but it's also not so difficult, not so easy to understand. So we therefore know that Vedavyas, he wrote a natural commentary to the Vedanta Sutra, and that is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, and it begins with the same words, Janmadhyasya Jata. And so the Srimad Bhagavatam, so if the Vedanta Sutra is the essence of all the Vedas, the Srimad Bhagavatam is then illuminating the essence of all the Vedas in a very personal, approachable way. You understand? So the Srimad Bhagavatam is considered to be the ripe fruit on the Vedas, the ripe fruit on the tree of the Vedas. It is sweet. The whole tree is amazing, big mango tree. It's very beautiful. It can give you shade. You can use the leaves for puja. You can maybe use some of the branches to make a fire. So it's a tree is amazing. But of course, ultimately, the best part of the mango tree is the mango. Even mango wood is also very good, and mango leaves are very good. Mango. What you really want is the fruit. The fruit is what you really want. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is the commentary of the Vedanta. And the entire conclusion of the Vedas, the commentary is the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Srimad Bhagavatam, in one sense, you could also say that Vedanta Sutra, in one sense, is impersonal. And the most famous commentary on Vedanta Sutra is from Shankaracharya, which is impersonal. And to some extent, if it might seem that it's an impersonal text, because it's abstract, it seems that it's impersonal. But ultimately, of course, we have, the Sri Bhasya of Sri Ramanujacharya, and also the Govinda Bhasya of Baladev Vidyabhushana. But beyond that, the supreme commentary on Vedanta Sutra is the Bhagavatam itself. And you could say in a similar way, like in the Ishopanishad, it is said that the prayer is, please, O Lord, remove this blinding light, and show me your face. I want to see you, your personality. So in a similar way, the Vedanta Sutra, it's like Brahman effulgence. It's very complex. It's amazing. It helps one transcend matter. And even some scientists, quantum physicists, they say that the Vedanta Sutra describes the principles of quantum physics. So that's the Vedanta Sutra. The Vedanta Sutra is very complex, very scientific, and it describes the nature of reality, in a very, very incredible way. But quantum physics is very impressive, but ultimately, what do you do with quantum physics? What we really want is bhakti, love, and that's in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam shows that beyond the most, you could say, complex description of material or reality in general, or energy in total, beyond all of this, ultimately is the personal pastimes of the Lord. That's supreme. That's more important. The Bhagavatam is more important than the Vedanta Sutra, because the Bhagavatam is, you could say, manifests the whole variety of the spiritual world. Whereas the Vedanta Sutra gives a very perfect explanation of how we can transcend matter, how we can become pure and transcendent, and also gives, of course, hints like, Ananda Maya Vyasat. Ananda Maya Vyasat is a very famous sutra. We should all know. What does it mean? Ananda Maya Vyasat. No? Ananda Maya Vyasat? Vedasara, weißt du? Kamara Jivan Prabhu. Ananda is bliss. Ananda Maya Vyasat. Ananda Maya Vyasat means that we are always 100% pleasure seeking. Prabhupada mentions very often, Prabhupada mentions the sutra. So we are 100% pleasure seeking, and we will only be happy if we are fully satisfied, So the question is, what is the true source of Ananda, So Ananda Maya Vyasat, we are 100% pleasure seeking. And only to the degree that we have, Premananda, pure love of God, only to the level that we really have that, we will be actually satisfied. As long as we don't really have this Ananda, we will be looking for Ananda in the material world. Or in other words, you could say this sutra also proves that the Atma is by nature not neutral. It's neither neutral nor empty. The Atma is Anandamaya Vyasad. It's pleasure seeking. So it means it needs relationships. It needs to experience bliss. Anandamaya, that's how Prabhupada explains it. That Anandamaya means we need to find true love, basically. And if you don't have pure love of Krishna, then we're trying to find it in this world. We're trying through the senses. We're trying to enjoy money, power, influence, all kinds of things like that to satisfy that need. But it's the nature of the soul. The nature of the soul is Anandamaya, to have to experience, to have pleasure. It's not the nature of the soul to be detached. It's not the nature of the soul to be empty and to be free. The nature of the soul is to actually experience Ananda, Anandamaya Vyasad, 100%. And the Srimad Bhagavatam fulfills that. That's what the Srimad Bhagavatam does. That's the idea of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna comes to this world to attract us. The Leela of Krishna is there to engage our minds, to attract, to basically fulfill that need that we have. And it's defined in the Nectar of Devotion as Krishna is defined as Akhila Rasa Amrita Murti. So Krishna is the person who has the ability to reciprocate, Akhila, completely, perfectly. Akhila Rasa Amrita Murti, the rasa, any form of rasa, any form of taste that we require, may it be friendship or chivalry or parenthood or romantic, any personal desire that we have, Krishna has the ability to reciprocate it fully. Amrita Murti. Amrita Murti means that his body or his personal presence. Murtaye means mood. When we say murti, a murti in a temple, murti does not mean statue. Murti means character. So murti means Krishna depicted in a certain character. That's a murtaye. Murtaye, So Krishna playing flute, or Krishna with Balaram, or Jagannath, very incredible murti, So murtaye means a specific mood is being manifested, or is like a photo shoot, take a photo of a specific mood of the Lord, that's murti. So Krishna is Akhila Rasa Amrita Murti. He's that person who can manifest, any murti, any form, any relationship that we want to have with the Lord, he can manifest that, he can reciprocate that. And it's Amrita, Amrita means nectar, but it also means immortal. It's not unerschöpflich. You cannot unexhaustible. It's Amrita. It's unending. It's beyond death. Krishna is beyond death. Because the experience that we have, or one way Srila Prabhupada explains why we tend to become impersonal, is because we experience a lot of frustration, in relationships. Most relationships end up being frustrating. There's the love story, and then it transforms into the hate story. I saw one Indian movie, Hate Story. It's really good. It really showed it very well, how a love story can transform into a hate story. It's so the more you have a love story, the stronger the attachment, the more tragic the hate story can become. So Krishna is that person that will reciprocate in a way that it's it becomes deeper and deeper. Within this world, the nature of matter is that it's very exciting in the beginning. Relationships, are very exciting in the beginning. It's you have all this butterflies, and you're like, wow, and there's this funny clips of people in their first date, they're so polite, no, you first, and then 1 year later, like, give it to me, like. So that's the nature of this world, is that it decays, Of course, we should maintain some level of respect, as devotees. But generally, the nature of this world is that, things in material world are very exciting and good in the beginning, and then they decay. The nature of this world is decay. The excitement decays because our senses are very limited. Not only limited in the perception, what we can perceive, but also they become very, very blunt very soon. Like if you have a very good knife, you can cut, and it doesn't become blunt. But our senses, you have one chocolate, very good, 2 chocolates, 3, 4, then it becomes blunt. Then it's like you don't taste anything anymore. It's over. So that's the nature of the material senses, that they become blunt very soon. And the mind as well. The mind becomes used. The spiritual mind is different. In relationship with Krishna, it becomes better and better. And we chanted in this the Shikshastakam verse, Chetudarpanam arjanam mahadavagni nirvapanam shreya karava chandrika vitranam anandam buddhivardhanam. So Anandam Buddhivardhanam. It's an ever-increasing ocean of Ananda. So that's where we can get our Ananda. Because the Ananda in this world, it's very good in the beginning, but then it becomes less and less and less and less. But Anandam Buddhi means that it's like an ocean. It's a very beautiful metaphor. It's an ocean of Ananda, and it's increasing, becoming more and more, and overflooding more and more. So Anandam Buddhivardhanam, an ever-increasing ocean of bliss. That is Krishna. That is Krishna. Okay, I'll stop now, but maybe there are some questions, and yes.
Ich wollte fragen, du hast gesagt, dass das Srimad Bhagavatam ein Kommentar zum Vedanta Sutra sei. Und ich wollte dich fragen, was genau damit gemeint ist, weil wenn ich das lese, kommt es mir nicht wie etwas vor, was irgendetwas kommentiert, sondern...
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, his question was that we said that the Srimad Bhagavatam is a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, but it doesn't seem to be a commentary. So how is it a commentary? Well, there's a few things you could say. It's interesting. Sometimes when you read the purport of Srila Prabhupada, you're like, wow, where all this come from? So sometimes the commentaries of Srila Prabhupada you will see is that he is explaining so many things that might not be directly in the verse, but still he mentions it, in the commentaries. So that's one way to explain it. That the Srimad Bhagavatam is so many topics are being explained there. So many different stories. Generally you could say the Srimad Bhagavatam is like generally going through all the different avatars and then culminating in Krishna. The 10th canto is only about Krishna, and it's a preparation. You go to the 9 cantos, hearing about different avatars of Vishnu and Krishna, and then finally the final at the end is only Krishna Lila. Krishna Lila is mentioned in a few spots in the 3rd canto especially, and somewhere else also. But in the 3rd canto there is description with Vidura and Maitreya. There are some stories about Krishna as well. Yes, so but the main way how it is a commentary is because you could say style. It begins with the same words, Janmad Yasya Yata. So it begins with the same words, and that's an indication that this text that is coming now is related to this text. So that's one other aspect. But the main point is that the Srimad Bhagavatam, especially if you read the second chapter of the first canto, you could say the purpose of the Srimad Bhagavatam is explained, very nicely. And there you understand that Prabhupada talks about it also in different purports there, how the Srimad Bhagavatam is what the purpose is of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, is excluding any form of dharma that it's only temporary. So no kaitava dharmas, no dharmas that are. It's not about mundane duty. How to be a good father, or how to be a good mother, how to be a good son, how to be a good king. It's not about these temporary duties. It's really trying to focus on that activity that gives pleasure to the self. So that's, so if the Vedanta Sutra says Ananda Maya Vyasat, the nature of the self is to seek pleasure, 100%, then the Bhagavatam says, here, that's how you get pleasure. You get pleasure by focusing on activities that are directly connected with Krishna. And I'm not an expert, but I've heard once a lecture where they were making a direct connection, this sutra and how it's explained in the Bhagavatam. This sutra and how it's explained in the Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam contains for sure the answers to all the, you could say, queries and topics of the Vedanta Sutra. And it may not always be as straightforward. It's not like a commentary where you have, Vedanta Sutra verse number 2, and that's the verse from the Bhagavatam that's commenting directly. But as a whole topic, the Bhagavatam is commenting all the different topics of the Vedanta Sutra. And it's indicated by those words, Janmadhyasya Yata. They both begin with the same words. And one becomes, the Vedanta Sutra, and the Bhagavatam, elaborates, becomes this big explanation. The difference is that the Bhagavatam is more accessible. We can easily access the Bhagavatam because it's personal. It's very philosophical in many sections also, but ultimately it leads to the pastimes of Krishna. Yes.
Thank you very much. May I ask you another question?
Mm-hmm.
It's not really related to the topic we were talking about, but I asked myself, I find oftentimes in the scriptures passages where it's stated that one has to meditate on the Vishnu form in the heart or in imagination, but then it stops, and I think, okay, and then what? Or what is the purpose? Or what shall happen then? Or why do I do it? And maybe you can say something to that. What shall develop then? Or
So the meditation of Vishnumurti in one it's related to the realization of Paramatma, and you could say the meditation of Vishnu in the heart is the beginning of the path of bhakti, because there is also, you could say, impersonal meditation, and when you meditate on the form, like in the second canto of the Bhagavatam, there's a detailed description how you should meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord, then on his legs, then on his knees, on his waist, on his abdomen, then his chest, his arms, and finally you meditate on his face. So the sequence of how to meditate, it's often described that's also how you actually relate to the deity. So when you see the deity in the temple, actually it's recommended to first look at the feet. You first look at the feet and then gradually you raise your eyes towards the face. It's considered to be more respectful. It's considered to be to some extent disrespectful to look somebody straight into the eyes. And in the temple in Tirupati, there's this Radha Krishna with Ashtasakis in Tirupati, and they have a curtain that doesn't go like this. It opens from the bottom to the top. And it's very practical, because then you first see the feet and then slowly, and then at the end you see that. It's very nice. Yes, so but meditation of Vishnu is a prerequisite, you could say, because the Lord is in the heart, Paramatma is in the heart, and this meditation of Vishnu is to become aware that the Lord is present in our hearts, to become aware of this, companion, Antaryami. The Lord is in the heart already as a companion, and we only need to remember that He's there. We have forgotten. But the relationship with Paramatma is similar to the relationship with the deity. You just take darshan. You're meditating on this form and just observing this form. You are getting purified. And then, of course, Bhagavan realization is when you start having an exchange, of prayers or service. Yes.
Thank you. But imagining is something different than seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, is the goal seeing Vishnu in the heart, and is it possible, or?
Yeah, of course.
So by imagining, he starts to manifest, and I see. Oh.
Yeah. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's described in detail in the second canto. You can read it again. I forgot the chapter, but it's in the second canto, and the description is there. How he looks, wearing blue garments, yellow garments, and wearing different alankars, different jewelry, and there's the Srivatsa, and the Kaustuba jewel, so different, you could say items, that are, and the Lord manifests. Yeah, so it's like a practice that culminates in a realization. So in the beginning it's practice, but then it can culminate in realization. So, yeah, Hare Krishna. Anything else? Jayatam.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you for the nice lecture. You were mentioning about a knife, like a knife compared to our senses. A good knife never goes blunt. It goes blunt eventually later, but our senses are also incompetent, and like we are pleasure seeking, and we get used to everything. Like we need every time something new. But when we do this, let's say for example, when in the Kartik we hear the Damodar Katha every day, we feel something new every time. And every year or the upcoming years, every Damodar, every Kartik month it happens the same. We feel something or the other new. Why is it like that? And in this case, aren't our senses incompetent, or are they competent enough?
So you said that every year feels good?
It feels different.
It feels different,
Yeah.
But there's two things. The first thing I would say is that you can maintain the senses, sharp by tapasya. That's recommended. That's why tapasya is important, because tapasya means that you give the senses a break. You sharpen the senses. The senses and the mind become sharp and pure and receptive again by tapasya. If you didn't eat for a whole day, then afterwards you eat, a broccoli or a carrot and you taste it. Wow, it's very good. But if every day you've been eating, sabji with a lot of, garam masala, and all kind of, I'm sure, powder and black salt and pepper and lemon, then broccoli is boring. But if you didn't eat for 1 day or 2 days, then you eat the broccoli and it's very good. So tapasya is important to sharpen the senses, to keep the senses, attentive and clean. And if I understood rightly, spiritual topics are always fresh, because they you could say they are perceived, or they are perceived by the spiritual senses. So spiritual senses are just spiritualized material senses. The material senses can't be spiritualized. We can use the same senses that we use for sense gratification. Those same senses we can connect them with Krishna, and they become spiritualized. And if we have the right consciousness and attitude, then we will experience every time, a deeper, sweeter experience. And Kartik is a very good example, because, maybe there is, some separation the whole year. So every year Kartik is a very exciting time, Oh, finally Kartik again, Singing Damodarastakam again, here in Damodar Leela. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.